Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Good No Good News Story featuring America's Infrastructure Night, the only night of the week where we check the nation's pulse and discover it's running a fever, limping and asking for a second opinion, yours. I'm your host, Elizabeth Caldwell, and tonight we're talking about and taking a tour of America's systems, the ones that are supposed to hold us, guide us toward forward, and keep us informed. Spoiler alert, they're not doing such a great job. Tonight on America's Infrastructure, we're talking about a different kind of pothole, the one in our information system. This week, a headline from the Oregonian declared, the state of Oregon, for those who didn't quite get it, this tax season has a new sneaky deadline. April 9th, surprise! Not April 15th. Sounds national, right? Except it isn't. That April 9th deadline applies only to Oregon's state tax rules, not the federal IRS deadline. For the rest of the country, including Pennsylvania, federal taxes are still due April 15th. So release that breath and get some oxygen into your system, folks. This is why we repeat certain stories, actually, because the cracks in our communication, information, infrastructure are just as dangerous as those cracks in our 50-year-plus old bridges and roads. A headline can be technically true and still structurally misleading. This is our infrastructure at its finest. So it's like banning the supply before building the replacement. It's like, well, shutting down all the bridges and then announcing, we'll get around to building new ones eventually. And finally, the mindset that keeps showing up in our policy headlines and public conversation. The United States, us, U.S. versus them, the rest of the world mentality. It's the idea that strength comes from drawing lines instead of building systems, that security comes from exclusion instead of preparation, that we can outshout, outban, or outblame our way into stability. But infrastructure doesn't care about our slogans. It cares about planning, maintenance, and reality. And one more for tonight, because this is the one that deserves repeating. A headline this week claimed, this tax season has a new sneaky deadline. Again, April 9th, in case you're not paying attention, not April 15th. And I know the first time I read that, I sort of panicked. My gosh, today is April 7th, and 2 more days, my taxes are due. Who knew? But when you go into it further, you find out it's for Oregon, not for the rest of the country. And this is what happens when the headline is technically true, but structurally misleading. It's not a lie, not like you tell your kids, don't lie. It's just not the truth you think you're reading. In other words, it's a matter of interpretation. Oregon's interpretation, not the IRS interpretation. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, is why Infrastructure Night exists. So tonight's reminder, please read past the headline. Sometimes the facts are included, but the framing is that pothole. And we begin with another story that refuses to leave the internet. The Forbes article that keeps resurfacing like a ghost in the machine. It's outdated, it's misleading, and yet it keeps getting pushed into people's feeds as if it's breaking news. This is what happens when the information infrastructure has no quality control. Old stories become news stories, and the public gets whiplash trying to figure out what's real. If the internet were a library, this would be the book that keeps jumping off the shelf and shouting, read me first, even though the facts expired 3 years ago. Next up, communication. That part of our infrastructure where one clear word beats 5 fuzzy ones, and yet we keep choosing the fuzzy ones. We live in a country where instructions are written like riddles, headlines are written like traps, and clarity is treated like a luxury item. If communication were a bridge, half the signs would say proceed, the other half would say do not enter, and the GPS would calmly announce you have arrived. Now, let's talk about that router ban. The FCC's decision to block new foreign-made routers from entering us, capital U period, capital S period. The routers in your home, you remember those, they get updates for 1 year. After that, they become vulnerable. And the United States has no domestic router manufacturing ready to replace them. Whoops! And that's our tar of America's infrastructure, the roads, the wires, the headlines, and the system that keeps us guessing. I'm Elizabeth Caldwell, reminding you that a country this complicated, the cracks aren't always in the pavement. Sometimes they're in the information, the communication, and the decisions made in rooms we never see. So, my tip for you tonight, stay steady, stay sharp, and stay tuned. This has been the Infrastructure Night on the No Good News Story.